Welcome to Sport Unlocked, an unexpectedly early return for some big news. Welcome, I'm Rob Harris from Sky News with Martyn Ziegler from The Times and Tariq Panja from The New York Times, and a huge announcement from the Premier League. After a 4-year investigation, Manchester City charged 115 charges relating to financial breaches. This caught us unawares this morning, Martyn.
115. It's just incredible. I think we've talked about this in months before, that I think I predicted that there was going to be an outcome last summer and that there was something was going to happen. That never happened. Then I thought it might be September.
Well, there's a pod. There's a pod if eagle-eared listeners are interested in finding. Martyn, you did say you thought it would be a September, didn't you? I mean, this is how long this thing has been dragging. So maybe were you a bit prepared then, I suppose, when it comes
Well,
to work?
I'd got a sort of background ready to go, which I think I'd written in September, thinking something might happen. And then when the statement went on the Premier League, somebody from my office rang, had gone on to check their fantasy football price changes and said,
The source of all good stories.
This is something really noteworthy, isn't it? Because perhaps there were some suggestions around. There was a briefing that announced this, because it was an unusual way this was announced by the Premier League. It wasn't like fixture changes or decisions by the shareholders where there's a press release that's sent out or it's tweeted out. It was just posted on the website, so it had to be spotted, this announcement.
Yes. No. Why was there no email? That was strange. Somebody.
Given that there's loads of emails in the week, right? I mean, it's not as if we don't get emails from the Premier League announcing or providing details of all sorts of other, I would have thought, more minor issues than this, right? You would get emails in your inbox.
I don't know what the rationale is.
Yeah, curious, obviously, when it's all about people having faith in the process and the system, transparency, not just to announce it. Although, as we know with these sorts of cases, every aspect of it can be passed, particularly when it comes to the hearings itself. So perhaps they were just literally complying with, as the rules say, which is they have to post the announcement. And the announcement was there will be a commission looking into these 115 charges. This isn't the end of it yet. We haven't had the verdict. We don't know what the punishment will be. And of course, all this stemmed from the football leaks that we started to read from 2018 into how Manchester City tried to comply with the financial regulations, the Premier League's financial rules, UEFA financial fair play. This went through UEFA. UEFA did ban them from the Champions League. February 2020, 3 years ago, that ban was imposed. It was then overturned in July 2020 at CAS. But Manchester City were not exonerated. They were found to have obstructed the investigation, in fact, and were fined €10 million, pretty unprecedented for football. And a lot of the allegations were found to be time-barred, the fact that they couldn't be prosecuted because they happened too long ago. So what are the key parts of the Premier League case now against Manchester City?
Well, it's kind of split into various sections, but essentially one of them is providing inaccurate information about revenues, including sponsorship revenues, over 9 seasons from 2009. The other 9, yeah.
How many?
9 seasons.
9? That's almost a decade of Premier League football.
The other is providing misleading information about manager and player payments. Now, we know one thing from the Der Spiegel football leagues about the famous Roberto Mancini shadow contract that he had with the Al Jazeera club in Abu Dhabi. He was actually paid more by Al Jazeera for 4 days a year than he was paid by Manchester City.
Well, they do say salaries in the Gulf are a bit better than they are in the UK. And how many days? Did you say 4 days for that $2 million if you're in the United States?
And then the other sort of most serious part of it is not complying with the investigation for the last 5 seasons. Now, we know from the High Court that has been an issue because Manchester City actually launch a legal challenge against having to produce documents. And we know that from a High Court case. So, that's the other significant body of charges.
On that last point, Martyn, about not providing clarity or not helping the investigation or obstructing it, if you like, that was a claim that UEFA had made against Manchester City too in the FFP investigation. And it was one that the CAS actually upheld, that Man City, I think they were fined a significant amount of cash for that. But then if you look at Man City's statement, Rob, it says, let's just read it for a second. It says here, Man City FC is surprised by the issuing of these alleged breaches of the Premier League rules. And here's the bit. Particularly given the extensive engagement and vast amount of detailed materials that the EPL is being provided with. Now, Martyn said they went to court to try and prevent this happening. We've mentioned the UEFA thing. The statement itself seems to be at odds with almost reality as far as the Premier League and I suppose UEFA before it's concerned.
Yeah, the statement from City does continue. The club welcomes the review of this matter by an independent commission to impartially consider the comprehensive body of irrefutable evidence that exists in support of its position. As such, we look forward to this matter being put to rest once and for all. That's how the City statement ends. Let's remember actually how we know about all this. So Manchester City submit their accounts every year. They've got the revenue in there. They submit that to the Premier League. They submit it to UEFA to ensure compliance with their rules. The only reason we're talking about this is because we have those Der Spiegel leaks from Rui Pinto, the computer hacker, the Portuguese man, and that information was published by Der Spiegel, and it showed internal City correspondence back with Abu Dhabi, back with particularly one figure, Simon Pearce, who also works for the government in Abu Dhabi as well. And this is correspondence that was never intended to see the light of day. So from the City's perspective, we've heard their complaints that actually this sort of information shouldn't be admissible in public, but actually there's the whole public interest defense that it informs us with information about how actually City were running and how things like sponsorship revenue was flowing around and how deals were being put together. So I suppose the question is, while City do say they've provided extensive engagement and materials, this is materials from Manchester City. Have they provided fully details from the UAE and from Sheikh Mansour's other parts of the business as well?
Also, you mentioned Rui Pinto, the hacker, and there's another one of the differences between the Premier League case and the UEFA one. We mentioned the time bar element, so the Premier League doesn't have the time bar in it. But there's also what kind of evidence you can use. UEFA's standard of evidence would have disregarded the Pinto evidence as primary source. So the FFP investigators would have had to use that to then ask for more information. The Premier League doesn't have any rules that said, even though this information may have arrived in this, I guess a criminal way. In this case, the guy is a computer hacker, but it's made it in the public domain, and the Premier League could use that. That's the other difference. And just one last thing: this briefing that Manchester City had given reporters in the Northwest, Man City reporters today. One of the things Martyn's already refuted, that there wasn't a media briefing, just some guy checking his fantasy football league score and come up on it. So that's gone. There was no briefing. And the second thing that was interesting, Man City said finally, they relished this opportunity to go through all of this and including the stuff that was time barred because they were frustrated they couldn't go through that in the original CAS case. But it does beg the question that why then did those expensive Manchester City lawyers go to CAS and argue this very point that it's time barred and should not be examined? If they wanted to examine then, they could have done it then. So I'm finding the messaging from Man City very confusing.
Yeah, if we go back on the CAS case as well, that actually they didn't find some breaches relating some parts of the sponsorship, some of those sponsorships from UAE-related companies. As Cass said, the evidence clearly demonstrates that Etisalat, they're a communications firm, and Etihad, the airline, met their sponsorship obligations in full in return for valuable rights, and that the sponsorship payments were not funded by City's parent company, Abu Dhabi United, because this related to some parts of money being filtered around back in Abu Dhabi to fund the sponsorships. If we go on another part, though, of the Cass case, they did say that the leaked emails were admissible evidence. And they also went on to say that they found City's failure to cooperate with the UEFA investigation a, quote, severe breach, and that MCFC is to be seriously reproached for obstructing the investigations that took place there. So, you know, the Cass case, if anyone goes through it, has lots of detail about some of the deals that went on, some of the sponsorships. And why this was significant, of course, was because the takeover happened in 2008 by Sheikh Mansour. And then within 3 years, we had the start of UEFA starting to have their break-even rules for financial fair play, designed at the time to secure the sustainability of clubs, originally perhaps envisaged to tackle debt in football, but in the end restricted the spending by clubs. So when did the Premier League's version come in? And that was all about how much you could increase your revenue over the TV rights rise, wasn't it?
Yeah, but the Premier League have had this other. They also had this other, a much more sort of easier financial fair play target to hit. So whereas like UEFA said you could only lose 35 million euros over 3 years, the Premier League's saying you could lose up to 105 million pounds. So it's been much, much easier, but they also require sort of, I think, a greater detail over sort of declarations by the club. So that, you know, there's this issue about, you know, how much you pay your players, how much you pay your manager. I don't think, I might be wrong, but I don't think that is stipulated by the UEFA rules. So that's a difference there. And as you say, there's no sort of time bar in the Premier League. I just wonder if we should, in terms of like, you know, the sort of big picture of English football, world football, where this stands. Somebody asked me about this. How big is this? I mean, certainly in terms of the Premier League, in 30 years of Premier League, there's been nothing like it, as far as I can remember.
Jeez, it's enormous, isn't it? You're right. Let's unpack it a bit. So, this is the Premier League, the world's most popular domestic football league, a major British cultural export, a thing that this nation is known for. This team has been its champion multiple times over the piece. I think is it six league titles since
and
2012?
3 of them since the investigation began by the Premier League in 2018.
Absolutely, and yeah. So that's how long the investigation has been going on, and it's changed football immeasurably. Like on the field, the number of points needed to win the Premier League, for example, Man City have taken this to a different level. In order to beat Man City to the Premier League title, and very few teams have in recent years, you have to almost be perfect to do that. The type of squads that teams are building at the moment, Man City, I would say, have two players for every position, valuation conservatively 40 to 60 million in every position. Their youth development system is now the envy of the world. They've built that on the back of also this major capital expenditure from Abu Dhabi. They're being able to pick off the best, brightest in not only British but European football. And it's changed football immeasurably. And the impact is what, Martyn? So if they have done all of these things, they've won these titles, but there are teams that are not going to be playing in Champions League or in Europa League or the Conference League. There are teams that aren't having their football destiny as maybe it should have been. Football, I guess, is a game that works on rules, whether on the pitch and off the pitch. So this is absolutely enormous, is it not?
I mean, if the rule breaches are proved, or the majority or a substantial number, then I think it opens a can of worms with the other clubs, doesn't it, Rob? Manchester United and Liverpool finished second when Manchester City won the title. Other clubs missed out on Champions League, for example, which obviously financially is a huge amount of money. I know at least one club is thinking, well, if it does go it gets to the end of this process and it's proven that they did provide this misleading information, then that they're going to sort of have a serious look at it legally. But what do you think on that this sort of idea that this could lead to a host of other things happening?
Well, Tariq, we were there at the World Athletics Championships in Qatar in 2019 when they were holding medal ceremonies, not for the 2019 Worlds, but for previous World Championships, having seen Russians stripped of their medals, and they're recreating these medal ceremonies from a few years earlier to hand out those reassigned medals.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it was an incredible scene. You didn't think it would happen in football, and you have that in Olympics as well. With like you said, with athletes that are doped, getting them medals stripped away from them, and the genuine winners getting them sometimes, as long as 8 years later, by the time all the dust is settled. It's remarkable. This is the thing. The scale of this, Martyn. You described it at the start. 2009. We're in 2023. So much has happened in that time. Football has moved on in so many different ways. This super team has been constructed. And what about those teams in Europe who've been talking about struggling to keep up with the English dominance? Some of them have been taken to the brink of bankruptcy, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's been going on so long, this case, that the iPad didn't exist when these allegations are said to have started.
The iPad?
The iPad was only released in 2010.
Is that right? Bloody hell. Incredible.
Yeah. That's how long. No one could have been sending emails on an iPad to try to discuss sponsorships within Manchester City in 2009. But I suppose if we look at the options that are there, so relegation, points being docked, titles being stripped, what would be the most consequential? This is assuming that they are found guilty of parts of this, and obviously City are hoping that they have the case thrown out. I suppose what is the fairest thing to happen for football, potentially, in terms of a punishment?
Well, the Premier League handbook does state there's points deductions or expulsions from the Premier League, which effectively is relegation. I don't think it says anything necessarily about titles being stripped. I'm not quite. I mean, can you dock points retrospectively from every season? Possibly you can,
Well, that was going to be my question to you. In that handbook, it mentions the points deductions, because if you can't, now let me offer you this. This is in our game show. You are Club Ziegs. I'm going to give you the chance to cheat, potentially, and I'm going to let you cheat, and you're going to win 7 titles. But I can't take any of them away from you or dock any points. But I can dock points in this season where you might not win any titles. So, and you might even get, would you take 1 relegation for those 7 league championships, Martyn?
Well, the impossible question, Tariq.
And for those listening around the world, perhaps forgetting their history or being less familiar with Manchester City's not too distant past, they were playing in the 3rd tier in 1999, so they have known life in the low reaches. They had to rise up again. They had the takeover by Sheikh Mansour in 2007. He then faced accusations of human rights abuses while the Thai Prime Minister, which led to effectively, as we gathered, a sense from the Premier League that you better sell up, which led the way into Sheikh Mansour. All the money comes in, and eventually in 2011 they win the FA Cup, their first title in decades, and then they win the Premier League for the first time in 2012, which ends their 44-year title drought. So I suppose if we're looking at sanctions, I mean, one thing that struck me, if they were fined potentially part of each year's winnings over the period of wrongdoing, or each season is found to be wrongdoing in, and it was a pretty hefty fine, say even to the hundreds of millions, that would then create a sort of, for other reasons, a Barcelona situation, because they would have to suddenly...
Would they not fail FFP
exactly.
then,
Would they
Rob?
have to suddenly offload a lot of players to suddenly have to try and comply with FFP? They certainly wouldn't be in Europe, but then comply with the Premier League rules. So it would sort of make them rebuild and weaken their squad in another way. And as we saw happened at Barcelona, but for reasons of their own sort of financial issues that they sort of brought on themselves, it can be seen as.
Probably not, because certainly under UEFA rules, any financial fair play fines did not count against you for your financial fair play calculations. So that probably wouldn't affect them there. I mean, obviously there's a whole process to go through. They're not guilty. Let's make that absolutely clear. There's clearly a sort of serious case to answer, and 4 years of investigations by law firm and Premier League's legal team. They must be pretty confident themselves they've got a strong case. What some people, Manchester City fans, might say is that this is the old establishment trying to push back the newcomers, the new money coming in. And
pull up the drawbridge is the phrase that gets used.
Yeah.
Well, that I think that's fine as an argument, right? That they could have fought, and you could really justify an argument that the financial fair play regulations, certainly the UEFA ones, if you looked at them in that way, in that light, you could make a case for that. But if you wanted to, you could fight those rules. You can do go down the legal route, go down the public relations route, and really challenge the rules. But those are the rules that they had signed up to at the time. You might not like the rules, and you could try and change them, and you could say they're pulling up the drawbridge, but you still have to abide by those regulations and hope to change them. So, fine. What about this idea that there is an agenda against them, Martyn, that it's only about Man City?
Well, I did see quite a lot of this on social media. How come Chelsea can spend 620 million and sort of get away with it, and nothing happens to them, and at Man City? But this isn't about breaching spending rules. This is about sort of deliberately providing inaccurate information, which is a completely different thing.
What you're saying is simple. It's about cheating and getting caught, right? I mean, if you strip it all away, it's about cheating, isn't it? And then getting caught, I guess. And the thing about the agenda, it's not anyone's fault that Rui Pinto's leaks happened to bring this to light. And there's been other cases, haven't there, Rob? There've been tax avoidance cases across Europe where football players, Messi, Ronaldo, all sorts of others, coaches have been fined by tax authorities, criminally charged in some cases. Gianni Infantino's case involving the Attorney General of Switzerland, that's related to stories being leaked from football leaks. So it just happens to be Man City's data and that information was available. And if it was another club, I'm sure they'd have similar investigations.
Well, yeah, and actually, the first reporting of these football leaks actually came, Tariq, do you even remember, from both of us, actually, from that moment where we actually spent almost an hour with Gianni Infantino in Rwanda at a council meeting in October 2018. We'd heard that potentially there were going to be some leaks emerging somehow, and what he said was that actually, I think FIFA was sort of braced for some information, what they believed was a sort of attack on their systems, that they were going to gain some information that would lead to things being in the public, and Infantino was there defending himself and referencing his time at UEFA as well, and because there was an expectation that actually there would be some information relating to that. But as we sort of look at this case in particular and some of the sort of detail from it, well, we mentioned Roberto Mancini there, and if we look at the Premier League statement, and it says that in the seasons 2009-10 to 2012-13 inclusive, it references the requirements for the member club to include full details of a manager remuneration in its relevant contracts with its manager, and it runs through those. So what this is an indication of, we don't know, because the Premier League statement doesn't actually say so, and Manchester City have never actually commented on this when we've asked, is the football leaks saying that Roberto Mancini, while City manager, had a basic salary at least at one point of £1.45 million from City, but as a consultant for the the team owned by Sheikh Mansour in Abu Dhabi, he was getting paid £1.75 million. And, well, this is what happened when we asked Roberto Mancini about this in March 2020, actually at a UEFA draw.
I don't know nothing.
Did you read when your salary was in there?
I don't remember.
Because it said you were being paid more from Abu Dhabi than you were from Manchester.
I don't know.
Ok, ci vediamo in adesso noi?
Quando andate voi?
Adesso.
Io...
Tariq, that was Roberto Mancini talking to us there. Not very clear.
I remember, yes. It was, I think, was that Bucharest?
Amsterdam.
Rob. Amsterdam, yeah, for one of those draws. The thing that struck me about his answer, maybe he's so loaded, the idea that you can't remember who's giving you $2 million a year was quite astounding. But again, I don't know how much money Roberto Mancini earns and how many of these pockets of $2 million in consultancy fees he generally collects. But yeah, that was extraordinary. There's so much of this.
And crucially, Mancini, of course, could earn money from the team in Abu Dhabi. There's nothing wrong with him having a consultancy elsewhere in football. It would just have to be sort of fully declared, and for the financial investigators to assess actually how this was interlinked, being a related company to Manchester City.
Have you asked the current Man City coach about any of this?
Well, I did in 2019. This was at the point of the UEFA investigation emerging, actually, wasn't it, in that week? Just to ask, actually, if he had any similar arrangement. Was he also earning anything from another team? And, you know, what I actually crucially did say was the fact that I actually started by saying I know he's not responsible for the club finances, when asking him if actually there was any sense of the treble being diminished because of the investigations. The fact he engaged with that answer, I felt, well, actually, there is another part to this, which is about the, pay of managers. And, he just got a bit irate, but no one's ever sort of come back to me to offer any sort of fuller response.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was brave journalism there, which you guys have obviously become very well known for, and long way to continue.
There is a fair bit of flack we do get on social media for pursuing this, and actually, it was something I tweeted around that time in May 2019, which actually, as we're recording now, people have started to like again. That's how I've just seen my old tweet come back, which was reading, the media's job isn't to be cheerleaders, easier life not to ask challenging questions of clubs we have dealings with and know, but that would be doing a disservice. Acclaiming performances of players can be separated from the need to report the surrounding circumstances at clubs.
Rob, you mentioned Pep was irate about the question, but he also said something I thought really interesting last year, and I think it was very unequivocal. He was asked, I don't know how this came up again, but I think it came up in some sort of media briefing, and he said that he's been defending Manchester City so passionately, so vociferously, because he's spoken to the owners and the management, and they've convinced him that they are telling the truth. And he said if he was to find that, and this is his words, that they, quote, lied, he will not be their friend anymore. And that's a quote too. And he would immediately leave the next day. So that puts him in a really weird position. I don't know how long the process will take now. You got this panel and then a potential appeal. But where does that put Pep Guardiola then?
One of those things, first of all, they can't appeal to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, can they?
No. The appeals process here will be organised by the same gentleman that is organising this disciplinary panel, Murray Rosen. I believe we say Casey now, a barrister. He's the first head of the Premier League's independent judicial panel. So he's going to set up this initial panel, and then he'll set up an appeals panel as well if the Premier League or Man City want to appeal that verdict. But if Pep has said, if this is seen to be true, I guess I'm off. What a sad way to exit the club that would be, given what he's done for Man City, I guess.
Well, and one aspect as well is he could say, actually, regardless of the verdict that comes in, he still actually has more faith in the people he's worked with and the leadership at Manchester City.
He could. So yeah, he absolutely could. Yeah. It would be a fun press conference that day. Pep, you're still here then?
Well, let's just move on to one other aspect of the case. It talks about in respect to seasons 2010-11 to 2015-16 that the clubs have to provide full details of player remuneration in relevant contracts. So what's this part about in particular?
Well, we're not sure for certain, are we? But one of the things that Der Spiegel reported on, which may be related, may not, we don't know, is the suggestion that there are emails or leaked data suggesting that Yaya Touré's agent was paid sort of for payments that were sort of off the books, as it were. Which obviously, if that is the case, and it's a payment for Yaya Touré somehow to his agent, then that would certainly be a breach.
Yeah, it speaks to the culture a bit, though. I mean, if that is happening, and without these leaks, these football bodies don't have subpoena powers. They're not like the police to see what a third party is doing with another third party. It just shows the power of what had happened in those Der Spiegel reports, really. And you wonder what lurks beneath the surface in these industries. But what about the United Arab Emirates as well? I mean, that's the thing. The repercussions of this are enormous, aren't they? You're talking about the brother of the ruler of one of the most powerful states in the Gulf, one of the most wealthiest countries in the world. He's been accused, or his team is, of essentially cheating in the Premier League, this really popular competition, with some of the country's most high-profile companies. We're talking about Etihad, the Abu Dhabi airline, Etisalat, the UAE telephone network. Diplomatically as well, there's potentially some risk here for embarrassing the UAE, isn't there?
And we've not really mentioned to this point the fact this is a state project as much. And obviously, we're talking about the money and where it's filtered around from state-related companies. But actually, this is the sporting face of the UAE in the way that we've had PSG and Qatar having the World Cup, Saudi Arabia with Newcastle and all their sporting events. This is the soft power play in 2008, before Qatar even won the right to host the World Cup, before Saudi Arabia was going big into bringing the international events there as well. This was a way of actually recasting the image of the UAE, perhaps. Although, of course, the UAE is seen very differently around the world, particularly Dubai, the sort of Western-friendly party lifestyle. We don't really have a significant focus from the rights groups on the labour laws there, even though there are restrictions on rights like we've had in Qatar, the fact there are anti-LGBT laws as well in the UAE. Yet perhaps many people wouldn't realise that as much about the UAE because they do sort of paint themselves with this sort of friendlier image around the world, which Manchester City is an extension of.
Yeah, something also which crossed my mind regarding the ownership is, say that from a Manchester City point of view, the worst happens and they get found guilty and they lose all the appeals and what have you. Will this sort of diminish the appetite for the owners to put money in, engage, or will they think it's still worth it? It'd be quite interesting to see how they react.
Yeah, and I guess from a sponsorship perspective, does it diminish the brand value of putting your name on those shirts or on those billboards? When a lot of this is about sponsorship and market value. I mean, being accused of potentially found guilty of corrupting a decade of Premier League football can't be a good look when you're getting that bucket out and trying to raise money with sponsors. It's so many permutations here. So to put you two on the spot, we've been talking about this for ages now. I'll do that, Martyn, Rob. Brian, it's the 1998 World Cup penalty shootout. Argentina, England. Brian Moore is asking Kevin Keegan, will he or won't he? David Batty is stepping up. In a word, will Man City be punished significantly, and will the Premier League have the appetite to do this, guys?
In one word, possibly.
Boo.
Might go for the possibly too. I mean, they've built up such a weight of charges, and you've got to think that they've spent so long deliberating over this that they believe the case has a merit to at least pass it to the commission. Now, the commission could well consider how the information was gathered and actually the quality of the information on hand, and also the unprecedented nature of it. And we could perhaps be going through lengthy legal challenges depending what happens, both in terms of how City actually handles the commission process and then anything else going forward. And City and their fans will point to, everyone said, maybe apart from City fans, that after that UEFA verdict came in, that they're banned the Champions League, this is it, the guilt's been found. But they had that success at CAS. They managed to find issues, certainly with the way UEFA pursued the case.
Just to remind people, Kevin Keegan said David Batty would score. Unfortunately for Kevin Keegan and England, David Batty missed that penalty, and England were out of the World Cup. A lot more succinct than the pair of you two, I'd say.
Well, it was a penalty shootout in 1999 that Manchester City won to gain promotion back to the
good knowledge,
second tier.
Good knowledge. Without getting bogged down in David Batty for too long, I don't want, and also not to get too Alan Partridge on, who I think he said something like I don't believe the police would arrest anybody if he wasn't guilty, but I do think, when there has been such a massive legal challenge to this already by Manchester City. I mean, they've had Lord Panic, one of the most expensive and high-profile barristers in the country, working on their behalf. You'd have to think that the Premier League must feel they're on pretty solid ground to bring these. It's not this isn't a sort of political move, I don't think.
No, after millions of pounds have been spent on this case by both sides. Really, given how long the legal fees in this have been absolutely enormous. And I remember there was an advert on a legal website. Man City were hiring so many lawyers at one point. I think it was a couple of years ago, that someone described to me that they have the equivalent of a law firm inside the club, with senior partners, juniors. There were so many lawyers working for Man City, and I guess that speaks to the stakes that are in play here. It's such a big deal. And one last thing, Rob, actually on this is, someone said, well, why aren't they going for anybody else? Why are they going for Man City? We talked about this, and it's the equivalent of asking, I don't know, like in the real world, if, I don't know, X person is allegedly committed a crime, don't arrest him because someone you don't know might have done it. Yeah, another club might have done these things, but this is the one that has been caught in this instance. A process has to begin and end, and that's all that's happening here. If another club has done it and is found to have done it, I'm sure a similar process would have played out. I guess Man City's bad luck is in having its emails hacked and it getting caught. But now a process is being played out, and that is what you would expect from a regulator or someone enforcing rules. It's just unlucky.
And of course, all this emerging as the government had to postpone plans for the appointment of a regulator for English football due to some changes within government. Martyn, your closing thoughts. How does this investigation issue story rank amongst all the many that you've covered?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like the Super League, is it? I mean, it's not quite as sort of international and, huge as that. But I think in terms of the sort of the world of the English Premier League, it's the biggest on their sort of domestic level. I can't think of anything like it really. It's I mean, I think back to all the sort of furore over sort of Tevez and Mascherano over West Ham. I mean, this is nothing. That is nothing compared to this.
And various match fixing cases over the years as well, but nothing sort of reaching a huge verdict in recent times. Tariq, I suppose, without being too Anglocentric, it's the Juventus case at the moment. That's the other we would sort of compare it to. That's a sort of one of significance.
Two Juventus cases, I suppose. The 2006 Calciopoli scandal, where Juventus ended up getting relegated and having to fight their way up. And then now Juventus, in this Plus Valenza case, they're again accused of cooking their books. A 15-point penalty, the board being removed, Andrea Agnelli, one of the architects of Super League, gone. Yeah, it's enormous. A punishment like that, Martyn, would seem pretty light in a sense for a decade of what Man City have been accused of, wouldn't they? That's what I mean. We've seen Juventus getting this enormous punishment for this one season of or for what they've done.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing to mention on that is when you on the 2006 Juventus scandal, and that they were stripped of Scudettos. They are still going through legal processes now to try and get those reinstated from 2006. So in 2039, when we're what pod number will be on by then, Rob? But we might still be talking about the Manchester City case in 2039.
Well, this is pod number 98, and through the entire existence of Sport Unlocked, this Manchester City FFP case has been rumbling on, and now it moves into the phase of the Premier League's commission. Well, a lot more to run on this. As ever, you can send your feedback to @SportUnlocked on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. For now, thank you for listening to this extra pod. Goodbye.